There are cryptic snowmen on the battlements at Winterfell. What does that mean? Well, listen in, because it's a great fan theory. Hi everyone, this is Robert. Welcome to Deep Geek. On this channel we cover A Song of Ice and Fire, The Lord of the Rings and other great fantasy books and TV shows like The Witcher. Welcome. I've said a few times in previous videos that the political situation inside Winterfell under the Boltons in the books is complex, which it is, and I'll set all that out over the course of the next few videos in a sort of series on what we often call the Great Northern Conspiracy. But the headline is simply that the Boltons are in charge with their allies the Freys, and most of the other northern houses have had to bend the knee. Outside Winterfell, there are some clear threats to this Bolton rule. Stannis' army is camped in that Crofters village, and some of House Umber, led by Moore's Crowfood Umber, are hiding outside the walls. Inside, though, are representatives of some of the most powerful houses in the north, along with some soldiers, who may or may not be loyal to the Boltons. Most probably aren't, but how do those who remain loyal to the Starks check with each other where their loyalties really lie without risking giving themselves away? And how do they communicate with their allies outside the walls? It's a fascinating situation that we see through Theon's eyes. You might think that Theon might not be the best of witnesses after all he's been through, but he is actually remarkably observant during this time, wandering around Winterfell like a ghost. He, let's not forget, knows the castle and its layout better than almost anyone else there, having grown up there, and also understands and recognises the politics and personalities of the various lords. So although he deliberately tries to steer clear of engaging with much of what is going on, he sees a lot. The movements of Mance's spearwives, the suspicious circumstances around those deaths I covered in a previous video, and so on. And one of the things he notices is the snowmen being built in Winterfell. As is typical of him at this point, he sees this, notices a few odd things, doesn't say anything to anyone about it or analyse it too deeply, and tries to keep away from what is going on. So what does he see, and why is it suspicious? Because there is a lot of snow and people can't leave the castle, so they have to pass the time somehow. Why not build snowmen? Well, this is what we read. A battle was being fought in the yard, Riswell's pelting Barroton boys with snowballs. Above, he could see some squires building snowmen along the battlements. They were arming them with spears and shields, putting iron half-helms on their heads, and arraying them along the inner wall, a rank of snowy sentinels. What's so suspicious about that, you might ask? Well, first of all, these are being built on the inner curtain wall. That's a very high wall, 100 feet, or a bit over 30 metres high. In snowy conditions, very cold, exposed on the top of a wall, is that really where you would go to relax and have some fun with your friends when there is plenty of snow down in the yard? Theon notes elsewhere how weird it is that someone should climb to the top of that wall when they don't have to. The stairs he takes to get up there are described as treacherous, for example. So maybe the squires thought it was important those snowmen were built there, on top of that wall, where they could be easily seen from outside Winterfell, say. George R. R. Martin actually reminds us via Theon in this very passage that the inner curtain wall is much higher than the outer wall, and that Theon himself can see outside Winterfell from atop it. And as well as where they are built, how they are positioned is also a bit odd. They are all in a line, so they can be seen individually by someone looking at them from inside or outside the castle. They are facing out like sentinels, and they are armed and armoured with spears and shields and helmets. So these squires presumably carted that heavy armour all the way up those slippery stairs over several journeys. And these are squires, let's not forget. Part of their job is to keep their knights' arms and armour clean and ready to go. Here, with the army expecting a battle with Stannis' forces any day soon, they are putting armour onto snow and leaving it there to rust. George R. R. Martin is hugely into the importance of heraldry. He often uses his influence to try to get the TV shows of his world to have more prevalent usage of house sigils, for example. Shields, in particular, were a way of showing whose side a soldier was on, and shields were being given to those snowmen. It's easy to see how this could be a way of signalling army sizes and compositions to those outside, with just a small amount of agreement earlier about what the code is. Each snowman is 100 troops, infantry have spears, knights have helmets, or whatever. The shields would show which houses they are talking about. Exactly the kind of information those outside would need to know. And talking of those outside, by which we mean Mors Umber's small force, how might they communicate back? Horns and drums, so loud they kept people inside Winterfell awake at night and convinced some that Stannis' army was approaching. At which point you may be wondering, all this talk of codes and secret messages would require a bit of planning, and the Northern Lords don't exactly get on all the time. True, but in this case we do have some very close connections inside and outside the castle. In particular, Mors Umber is outside and his brother Hother is inside. In their brother the Great John's absence, they jointly ruled the last Harthur's co-castellans. They may have officially declared for different sides in this conflict, Mors to Stannis and Hother to Roose, but few are taken in by this. Surely they will have come up with some way of staying in touch. If not this, then what? But there's more, because those aren't the only odd snowmen in Winterfell. Down in the yard we read this. More snowmen had risen in the yard by the time Theon Greyjoy made his way back. To command the snowy sentinels on the walls, the squires had erected 12 snowy lords. One was plainly meant to be Lord Manderley. It was the fattest snowman that Theon had ever seen. The one-armed lord could only be Harwood Stout, the snow lady, Barbary Dustin, and the one closest to the door with the beard made of icicles had to be old Horsebane Umber. Again, this is the squire's doing, not the stable boys, kitchen staff, or anyone else, which in itself may be indicative of something. They won't be thought of as important by most people, but they take orders from their knights and are usually very loyal. And these particular snowmen are an interesting group. They are made to look very obviously like some of the nobles in Winterfell. We don't get a full list, but Wyman Manderley is definitely a Stark loyalist. Hother Umbar almost certainly is too. We know less about Harwood Stout, but Theon did see him in hushed conversation with Hother Umbar, and he certainly doesn't like Ramsay. Ramsay's forces ate his household out of most of their winter food reserves, and Ramsay's dogs killed one of his, so it seems quite likely he is also part of the Stark loyalist grouping. Barbary Dustin is a complex character to say the least, and deserves her own video, but she certainly hates House Frey for the Red Wedding. Some of her own soldiers were killed there, and also Ramsay Bolton for the death of Domeric Bolton, her nephew, so let's count her in too. We don't know for sure these 12 snowy lords are the Stark loyalist lords, but certainly both of those we are most certain of are there. The houses we are most certain aren't, the Boltons and the Freys themselves, aren't there, and both of the other nobles we hear mentioned, we have good reason to at least suspect they may be sympathetic to the rebels. We aren't told exactly how these are arranged, but Theon makes an immediate link to the snowmen on the wall, saying that these were there to command them. So the snow troops on the wall are now their snow troops, presumably with their sigils on those shields. This is telling anyone outside with eyes to see exactly who is on their side and how many troops they have. As an aside, Theon's mental state in these chapters is far from robust, it has to be said, but it seems likely that he does guess some of this. He makes the link between the two sets of snowmen. He steers well clear of what's going on, as he does with anything that might get him into trouble, but swiftly climbs the walls to see the snowmen there and look out. The potentially Stark loyalist snowmen in the yard also noticeably match up with his own unvoiced list of those with uncertain loyalties. And everything we read suggests that Mors Umber was watching the walls. When Theon and Jane Poole jump from them, he is there swiftly to capture them and take them to Stannis. And he had been eagerly awaiting the Freys to come out of the main gate to march on Stannis, as they do right towards the end of A Dance with Dragons. Why? Because he had dug pits under the snow for them to ride into. Aenys Frey died, Hostine Frey lost his horse, and several more were also lost. Mors Umber didn't set similar traps outside the East Gate, where the House Manderley force headed out, so he presumably knew where they, his allies, would be exiting the castle, meaning someone inside must have communicated it to him. But wait, because the biggest objection people often come up with here is that Roose Bolton is no fool. Surely he will have noticed what was going on. Well, not necessarily. First, because he seems to have spent most of his time indoors, as any sensible person would in a snowstorm. Second, because the snowmen on the battlements were faced outward, so someone casually glancing up there would not have seen the sigils. And third, because the snowmen actually seem not to have survived all that long as signals, only long enough to get the message through. Theon notes a bit later that the snowmen the squires had built had grown into monstrous giants, 10 feet tall and hideously misshapen. For those who enjoy George R. R. Martin's often subtle wordplay, the sigil of House Umbar is a giant, and here the snowmen the two Umbar brothers seem to have been using to communicate with each other resemble giants. If you want more wordplay, though this one isn't specifically spelled out here in the text, the Stark loyalist plan is to link up with Stannis, who wants to make Jon Snow Lord of Winterfell. The message may or may not have got through to them this far north, but their old king Robb Stark had also declared his heir to be Jon Snow, so these are quite literally Snow's men. Snowmen. A bit more tenuous, but fun. The key point in all this is that there clearly has been some communication between the rebels inside and outside the castle. Those outside have been studying the castle walls. Theon has been making the links, but doesn't want to get involved. If this isn't cryptic snowmen, then it's something else, and it's just one of many hints that there is more going on in Winterfell than meets the eye. A great northern conspiracy of Stark loyalists is forming, and we will unpack the rest of it over the next few videos in this series. If you'd like to see more A Song of Ice and Fire videos like this, there's a link to my playlist on the left of your screen now. Or to support this channel, thank you, there's a link to my Patreon page on the right of your screen. Thanks for watching. That's all for this time. I'll see you again soon.